Good morning, good afternoon, dear colleagues, and welcome to all of you joining us from Africa and other regions. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to this AFRAF webinar series event dedicated to food fraud, what it means to Africa. This webinar is organized under the framework of the African Food Regulatory Authorities Forum, AFRAF, in collaboration and with the implementation by the Global Food Regulatory Science Society, with the objective to continue fostering the dialogue on emerging food safety challenges and strengthening cooperation among African food regulators. We are offering simultaneous interpretation into Arabic, and also there will be some French interpretation as well, particularly during the presentation that will be made by our keynote speaker, Professor Christopher Elliott. Mes chers collègues, je voudrais vous souhaiter à toutes et à tous la bienvenue, où que vous soyez en Afrique ou ailleurs. C'est un grand plaisir pour moi de vous souhaiter donc la bienvenue pour ce webinaire de la série AFRAF consacrée à la fraude alimentaire. Quels enjeux pour l'Afrique? Ce webinaire est organisé dans le cadre du Forum des autorités africaines de réglementation alimentaire AFRAF en collaboration et avec la mise en œuvre par l'Organisation mondiale des sciences réglementaires des aliments, GFORCE. Nous continuons à œuvrer à favoriser le dialogue sur les défis émergents en matière de sécurité sanitaire des aliments et à renforcer la coopération entre les différentes autorités de réglementation en Afrique. Cet événement va offrir une interprétation simultanée vers l'arabe en tout temps et pendant aussi la présentation qui va être faite par notre conférencier vedette qui est le professeur Chris Elliott. I am particularly pleased and honored on behalf of GFORCE and also the AFRAF community to welcome Professor Chris Elliott, a globally recognized expert on food integrity and international food supply chains. And we are very privileged to have Professor Elliott share his insights on food fraud and its relevance for Africa, but also introduce some tools that can support regulators and stakeholders alike to address this particular issue. I'm also privileged to welcome Dr. Mamadou Ba, the Director General of the Food Safety and Quality Authority of the Gambia, and the chair of the FAO-WHO Coordinating Committee for Africa, CC Africa. And I'm going to be asking Dr. Ba to give some introductory remarks to this event. Donc, je suis particulièrement heureux et fier, en fait, en fait, présenter notre conférencier vedette, qui est le professeur Chris Elliott, qui est en fait un éminent chercheur et un éminent scientifique dans le domaine de la fraude alimentaire, entre autres, et dans les chaînes d'approvisionnement alimentaire. Avant de commencer cet événement, je voudrais, et j'ai le plaisir de donner la parole pour des remarques d'ouverture à Dr Mamadou Ba, le directeur général de l'autorité de sécurité sanitaire et de qualité de la Gambie et le président du comité de coordination FAO-OMS pour l'Afrique, CC Africa. Donc j'espère que le Dr Ba est avec nous. Dr Ba, vous avez la parole. Dr. Ba, I think you're muted.
Trying to get to the mute button.
We can hear you now. We can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you everyone for joining this webinar. It's a pleasure to have actually all of you to join this important webinar. Particularly to have Chris Elliott, who will be the moderator, who will be the guest on this on this webinar. As we are sailing through the 2026 year, we are actually navigating food control systems with a lot of transitional approach of high stakes at the same time. We have critical challenges that are facing us as a continent in Africa, ranging from climate change, which is actually dealing a heavy blow to food production systems in the continent in terms of availability of water and other production requirements. We also have outdated or lack of infrastructure in our systems, which is also affecting in terms of production and processing, and also in the control system. Obsolete technology as well, or outdated technology, also affecting the food control system in the continent. So part of the challenges which are affecting our production systems. We also have food fraud, which has absolutely evolved over the years from simple adulteration or fraud practices to more sophisticated approaches, which are hard to detect and hard to trace. So these are also some of the challenges that we are faced at this moment. We also have quality and regulatory challenges. Highly processed foods become one of the key challenges to the quality of food and to the safety of certain food. And also, the additives of certain foods have challenged regulatory bodies across the continent in order to have a robust regulatory framework and effective regulatory system. So lack of harmonization also would be something to look out, and I'm sure it has affected hugely on our trading capacities. However, let's not also look at the daunting side. We have an opportunity. The African Continental Free Trade Area has presented a window of opportunity for the continent to make sure that we work around these issues and make sure that we increase our trading and develop our socioeconomic systems of our countries and of the continent in general. I'm sure I would not want to continue and talking more, so since the time is short, so I just want to once again warmly welcome all CC Africa members and encourage them to pay attention to what AFRAF has to offer and to look at the regulatory synergies that can be built within the AFRAF framework. So I know it's a work in progress, but let's work together as a team to make sure we build this regulatory frameworks that's for the continent. And let's take advantage of every opportunity in as much as we might differ in our key opinions or approaches. But let's put together our efforts, let's harmonize our systems, and let's build on building the economy for the continent. Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I can't hear you, Prof. Is something wrong? I cannot hear you, Prof, if you can hear me.
Yeah, Thank you very much, Dr. Ba, for your kind remarks. And I will use this opportunity to briefly summarize your statements in French for colleagues who are francophones before moving to our keynote speaker. Donc, le Dr. Ba, en fait, a réitéré l'importance d'événements comme ceci et de rencontres comme celle-ci en mettant l'emphase sur les transitions importantes que le continent africain est en train de traverser, l'ensemble des enjeux pressants qui influent sur la sécurité sanitaire des aliments, notamment les défis majeurs posés par les changements climatiques, les changements d'infrastructures, les défis technologiques et notamment les faiblesses technologiques que subit le continent, et également donc des fléaux comme la fraude alimentaire et son impact sur la sécurité sanitaire, la nutrition et la confiance des consommateurs. Néanmoins, le Dr. Ba a également mentionné les opportunités que le continent est en train d'observer, notamment avec l'avènement de l'accord de libre-échange continental et également le renforcement des collaborations entre les autorités réglementaires des aliments tout au sein du continent. Il a également exhorté les membres du comité CC Africa de continuer à œuvrer dans le cadre de ce forum d'autorités réglementaires et de renforcer les synergies entre les autorités réglementaires. Thank you once again, Dr. Mamadou Ba, for your inspiring comments. And I guess actually we'll have a short video and then we're going to move to our next segment.
The Global Food Regulatory Science Society. GFORCE mission includes knowledge generation and dissemination, underpinning food regulatory decisions, in support of food control systems, Our interventions focus on promoting food regulatory scientific disciplines, consistent reliance on food regulatory sciences enables robust food control programs, contributing to more resilient food systems and a safe, accessible, abundant and nutritious food supply.
It is now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today's webinar, Professor Christopher Elliott. Professor Elliott is one of the world's leading experts on food integrity, food supply chain risks. His work has been instrumental in advancing global understanding of food fraud, food authenticity, and the vulnerabilities that can arise in increasingly complex food systems. Today, Professor Elliott will be presenting on food fraud, what it means to Africa. C'est mon honneur et mon privilège maintenant de présenter et d'introduire le professeur Chris Elliott, notre présentateur vedette, qui va nous parler de la fraude alimentaire et de ce qu'elle représente pour l'Afrique. Professor Chris Elliott, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Sam, for the very kind introduction. But just a question for you first, Sam, because I see you're doing this amazing job of translating into French, something I cannot do. I struggle even to speak English sometimes. So would you like me to maybe stop speaking after each slide, or how would you like to operate?
No, for the French interpretation, we, just like the Arabic interpretation, we will have channels so you can speak without interruption, Chris, and we will try to cope with you, both the professional interpreter that is Haytham, Mr. Haytham, and myself, who will be attempting to follow you in French.
Fantastic. So I will try to speak a little bit more slowly than I normally do, and I will try not to use my local accent, my local Irish accent too much, which will confuse everybody. So first of all, you might see behind me 2 football shirts. I am a really big and fanatic about football. I am a big fan of 2 football clubs, but I'm also a fan of 2 other things, 2 other organizations. And those organizations is G-Force and AFRAF. So it's an absolute pleasure. It's an honor for me to talk to you today about the issues around food fraud. I think what G-Force and AFRAF are doing are really, really quite amazing. I also want to say the introductory comments from Dr. Ba were excellent. And I think what I will be doing is building on those a little bit over the next 20 minutes or so. So what I'm going to do now is hopefully share my slides. And if somebody could just let me know if everything is okay, you can see them okay.
Yes, it's okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So as Sam said in the introduction, I know quite a lot about the subject of food fraud. I have been working on it for many, many years, and actually in many, many different parts of the world. What I am not an expert on is Africa. But it's something that certainly, because of working with various UN agencies, particularly working with AFRAF, it is a continent I want to learn much, much more about over the coming years. Food fraud, it's a really difficult subject sometimes to talk about. It is controversial. I often call it the hidden crime because many people do not know that it's going on. But actually, the scale of food fraud globally is enormous. The amount of money that is made in food fraud is astronomical. Just recently, there was a key publication on fraud in the seafood sector, the seafood industry, and it estimated that about $40 billion worth of seafood trade each year is subject to fraud. 40 billion in one single sector. Where I come from, the UK, and we have estimated the annual cost of food fraud is approximately $2 billion. That's just one country. Very recently, there was a publication from Sweden, another very developed country. They estimate the level of food fraud in their food system at about $1.5 billion. And then if you start to think about the cost in economic cost of food fraud across the continent of Africa, 55 different countries, the cost is enormous. And that's something I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. So I think in terms of maybe starting off with the helicopter view of where things really sit in terms of our global food supply system. We have our climate crisis, we have our wars, we have issues around deglobalization, and we have multiple issues around geopolitics. These are the four areas that I really study quite intensively, not only about food fraud, but really about food security, the impact these big drivers for change are having on the food systems globally. I think it's quite pertinent today that I show this map. This is what's called the Global Conflict Tracker. Everywhere you see an orange dot, there is a major conflict going on in those particular countries. And the very sad and very worrying statistic is there is more global conflict now than at any time since the Second World War. We are living in very, very troubled times in terms of conflict. And all of those conflicts have a massive impact on our global food system. Here is a graph to show the changing prices of one of our major staples, wheat. Massive increase in 2008 because of issues, particularly actually in the Middle East. But then in 2022, the conflict was Ukraine. Massive increases in the price of commodities. And of course, I think we are all learning now about the conflict in Iran, in the Middle East, that is causing massive increases in the price of oil, and that is affecting everybody on this planet. As Dr. Ba said, massive issues in terms of food insecurity linked to climate change. And to me, actually, we always talk about temperature, but again, I would reinforce what Dr. Ba was talking about. A lot of it is about water. It is about the availability of water or lack of water. Often what we find is too much water in some areas and too little in others, which is causing massive loss of harvests. We also have the geopolitics, particularly in the era of the Trump regime in the United States with tariffs. I think the world is still struggling to understand the impact of these tariffs and actually what they are. They are far from stable yet. And we also have in the geopolitical and trade world, the massive expansion of BRICS. BRICS started off as Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, but now is rapidly expanding to many other countries across the world. And an article that I read last year talked about a new food power being born, and that food power is China. And there is very, very important links between food security in China and food security in Africa, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. Now, the impacts of all of those global factors are absolutely driving food fraud globally in an upward trend. We just see more and more reports of food fraud in many, many different parts of the world. That is absolutely for sure. And it's likely that trend will increase. Last year, for the UK food industry, for quite a lot of companies that came together, they asked me to look at what the risks were on the horizon for the UK food industry. And I delivered a lecture which was called the Sinister Seven to different fora in the UK to different sectors of the food industry. And I talked about these Sinister Seven. And the Sinister Seven are these things that I have in front of me. It is around a lot of those things that I talked about tariffs, disruptions to supply chains, labor issues, changing in European regulations, EUDR, which is having a really big impact on the world. We have growing amount of cyber crime. We have growing amount of thefts in the food industry. But the point I want to make is food fraud is one of those major risks on the horizon. And for all of these risks, they are interlinked with each other. I'm actually working on several projects looking at the links between food fraud and cybercrime, for instance, as part of a very large European funded project. So that's really on a global stage, but I do want to now to turn the spotlight on Africa. I want to talk about, yeah, some of the challenges, but also I think in line with the opening remarks from Dr. Ba, some of the big opportunities that the continent of Africa has now, but will increasingly grow over the coming years. Now, I think when I look at let's say I studied the food system of the UK, Europe, I've been doing quite a lot in Asia as well. And what I see is one of the biggest differences, particularly between Europe and the US and Africa, is how food is actually sold. In Europe, we have very advanced developed systems of supermarkets. In the UK, for instance, over 80% of all food sold comes from 5 different supermarket chains. It has really condensed. One of the big advantages of that is actually it helps keep the costs down, but the ability to have very good technical teams to control quality, safety, and authenticity is very, very large. Whereas in Africa, a lot of the food is sold through informal markets, which are much more difficult to regulate, much more difficult to check and inspect, actually much more difficult to help those people who are trading, because food fraud is a complex subject and it's really very difficult, if not impossible, for small businesses to really manage a lot of the risks. The second major challenge is, and again, this I think feeds on from Dr. Ba's comments, is it's about the regulatory capacity. It's about the enforcement resources. It's about the ability to go check, inspect. It's about the ability to take samples, undertake the analysis. So there are a lot of challenges. And again, this is, I think, some of the amazing work that's been done through G-Force and AFRAF is really to bring about much more collaboration, much more cooperation, to bring about this harmonization that is absolutely essential in terms of being able to manage fraud. You need this harmonized, well-functioning regulatory system. It's one of the things that I was really able to achieve in the UK. It took about 10 years, actually, and it started with a big food scandal. But now I would say the UK really has this amazing capacity now, not only to regulate, but for the regulators to work really closely with the food industry to try to combat food fraud. I think all over the world there is economic pressures within the food system. When we look at many different types of industries, the food system is by far the biggest. It is by far the most complex, and also it is the system that works with the smallest profit margins, very small profit margins. So there is always pressures, and what I believe is those economic pressures are even greater on the continent of Africa. And again, you know, it's something that we really want to explore in more detail, how that vulnerability is more extreme in Africa around economic pressures. Another key factor that really needs to be discussed and addressed is around traceability systems of supply chains. And again, I've done a huge amount of work with many different food companies, with different regulatory organizations in different parts of the world, looking at how fragmented, opaque supply chains really drive fraud. This is one of the biggest drivers, really understanding these supply chains, where the weakest points are, where the criminals are able to penetrate the systems. But when we think about food fraud, often people think about the economics. I opened this presentation talking about billions of dollars, but to me, as a professor of food safety, the biggest issue about food fraud is the negative health impacts on our citizens. And there is very, very difficult to quantify these health impacts. And again, it's something I'm going to turn to towards the end. There was a large study completed and published in the European Union just a few months ago, and it looked at all of the reported cases through what's called the RASIF system in Europe to look at how many of those food fraud cases actually impacted directly or indirectly food safety. It shocked me that their conclusion was that it was more than 50% and up to 75% of cases of food fraud have a direct or indirect consequences in food safety. So whenever we talk about food safety, whenever we talk about food fraud, they cannot be thought about independently, separately. They are one and the same thing. A safe food system is a food system which is free from fraud. So I think that's quite a lot of difficult information that I've talked about, the drivers for fraud, the vulnerabilities that are to Africa. But I want to take a few minutes and actually talk about Africa in a very different way. And I undertook a study about 12 months ago and started to look at Africa from a food security perspective. What I did not realize at that time, Africa has about 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. Now, the importance of that is for a lot of the rest of the world, soils have been exploited and depleted. There is major issues about increasing productivity of crops because of all of the damage that has been done to soils. So the soil in Africa, this is such a huge asset to your continent, giving such an enormous capacity to expand food production for the world. Really important statistic. And when I was doing this study on Africa, I started to think about actually the future of global food security lies in the hands of Africa. Such a massive role going forward. And this is the article that I wrote about it. And in this article, I talked about some of the great positives, about the growing international investment, modernization of your food system. And that's not just in primary agriculture, but also in food processing as well. And it's interesting when I talked about China really thinking into the future about its future food security. Well, China has decided, even as a large country, it will never be self-sufficient in food. And where is it turning its attention to in terms of future food security? That's the continent of Africa, with a large amount of investment in many aspects of the food system. But it's not only China is thinking about Africa. Very recently, I spent some time in the Middle East, and it's a very affluent, very rich part of our world, generated mainly by oil and gas income. But there is a realization that oil and gas will run out at some stage. And we're talking about a part of the world that has expanded its population quite dramatically over the last 2 decades. But they import over 90% of all of the food that they consume. And what is the Middle East doing? They are investing heavily in the continent of Africa. They see that as going to be the major source of their food going forward. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was in a large supermarket in the UK buying some of my fresh vegetables that I like to cook with. I always look at the labels to see where stuff came from. I saw for the first time most of the fresh produce I was buying actually came from African countries. That is a clear sign of how the food system is changing and to the benefit of Africa. I looked at the statistics. Africa currently accounts for less than 4% of global food exports. It's a small player, but the projections suggest that that is going to rise to 25% of all global food exports, 25%. Where I work in Asia at the moment, Asia likes to call itself the food basket of the world. And my goodness, with a statistic like this, I would say the food basket of the world for the future, and not too far away, will be the continent of Africa. But then back to the topic of fraud. And what I see is some of the major barriers to that. I think the free trade across the nation of the continent of Africa is hugely important. The export of food to be it the Middle East, Europe, China. The biggest barrier will be about the safety of food and the amount of fraud associated with it. I see that as being a huge barrier. That will not probably hold back the whole continent, but it will be the countries that do not put in place the systems and the mechanisms to be able to deal with the criminal activity within their food system. I always like to find solutions, and I think a lot of the solutions to combating fraud, food fraud, will be around science, technology, and innovation. The digital transformation of our food system is amazing. What is going on in so many different countries? I've got several countries projects where I'm working at looking at the innovations of artificial intelligence, digitization of food systems to promote trade, and also what that will do. It will reduce the amount of food safety incidents, and it will reduce the amount of fraud that's going on. So I think the work that's going on within G-Force and with AFRAF is amazing. And this idea about sharing information, harmonizing information is incredibly important. I'm also very, very aware of the formation of the African Food Safety Agency. And I was delighted, I think it was about 2 years ago when I was told that data was going to be put at the center of this agency, collecting data and then producing well-informed risk assessments. And again, the role of AI in this will be hugely important. And I really believe that G-Force and AFRAF will be major drivers to push these initiatives going forward. I also talked about laboratory tests. I came up with a concept about 2 years ago, and I called it Laboratory 2030. And Laboratory 2030, yes, it's full of nice, shiny equipment. It's full of well-trained people, but also it carries a huge degree of automation, robotics, which is very much around the 4th Industrial Revolution, but also will be very much driven by the 5th Industrial Revolution, which is artificial intelligence. And we have so many projects looking at how all of these things can combine together to produce laboratories which will be financially sustainable, but will be able to deliver really high quality, robust analysis to support the work of the food industry and support the work of regulators. My laboratory of the future is very much structured on what I call the 2-tier testing scheme for food fraud. On the left of my slide, I call it Tier 1. And this is really some of the innovations in testing technologies where we can use very low cost handheld scanners, which can scan food, can actually produce fingerprints of food. And what we can do with that data, with the advent of advanced statistics, with machine learning, with the use of what's called data fusion, where we can take results from different handheld scanners and combine them together. Actually, we can do a huge amount of testing using this Tier 1 testing. Why is that important? Because the cost per test will be much, much lower than it is currently. And also we can take the testing out of laboratories to where food is actually being produced. The tier 2 testing will be extremely important from the regulatory perspective, from the enforcement perspective. And I see this really akin to forensic laboratories who will take samples in well-controlled ways, store them properly, do the sample preparation properly, analyze the samples properly, analyze the data properly so that enforcement can take place. But the numbers of samples that will have to be tested in tier 2 will be much, much less than tier 1. And now this 2-tier system we are adopting in a number of different countries across the world. We're really rolling this out, and I very, very much that it will be rolled out across regions of Africa as well. I'm the very proud founder of a company which is called BIA Analytical. BIA, the word BIA, is actually the Irish name for food. So this is really about food analysis. And what we have done is really technology transfer, exploit a lot of the fundamental research that I've been involved in for more than 20 years, looking at miniaturization of the analysis in small handheld readers. We are developing our app, which allows the scanning of sample to take place and the generation of a result within 5 seconds. 5 seconds we can do our testing now. And we are rolling this out across different supply chains in different parts of the world. So this is very much, I call it the tier 1 revolution. It's not something that's for the future. It's something that we're doing right now. I think what's also very important in terms of the tier 2 testing, that building of Laboratory 2030. I work very closely with Agilent Technologies. It's a US-based company, but active in so many parts of the world. And we are forming an amazing partnership with AFRAF now, really thinking about how we can drive the high quality testing for food fraud, for food authenticity, using state-of-the-art equipment, using those robotics, artificial intelligence. And actually, just in a couple of months' time, I will be in Morocco with a thought leaders meeting with Agilent and a lot of their distributors, talking about how we can roll the technologies of food fraud detection out across your continent. It's very, very exciting times. Everything that I've talked about, it really needs collaboration. It needs the exchange of information. It needs the training of a new generation of regulators, a new generation of food scientists. The collaboration has to be between regulatory authorities and the food industry, but the collaboration has also to be between countries as well. And I think, again, AFRAF is so well being set up to get that collaboration between the regulators. And I know G-Force will bring in a lot of contacts with the industry. So I'm very, very upbeat about the future possibilities. So I'm going to finish now by what I call my call to action. There are 3 really big projects, programs of work that I think need to be driven forward for the benefit of Africa. The first is collecting as much data as possible about the public health impacts of food fraud in Africa. I can find lots and lots of information about the UK, about Europe. We can do that. It's really difficult to collect this information from Africa. So my call is anybody who thinks they might have some information, some data, I want you to join our work in really trying to understand the true costs in terms of public health impacts of food fraud in Africa. And the second is we want to do the same thing, but we want to calculate the economic impact. The economic impacts, what I have found in my career, are probably even more important than the public health impacts. Economic impacts tend to drive governments to do things more quickly. It tends to drive more sponsors, more donation coming in, because if the ultimate objective is to really make Africa the food basket of the world, we will really need to know this economic impact, so we know what the challenges are. And really the third action is working towards building Laboratory 2030 with the two-tier system that I have outlined today. So I think I could talk lots and lots more about this particular topic, but I can't, because I promised Sam that I would try to keep it to about 20 minutes. So here is my email address. If you want to contact me about any of these calls of action, please feel free to do so. If you don't want to contact me this way, you can contact me through AFRAF or from G-Force as well. So I think with that, I will stop talking now, and I will pass you back to our moderator, Professor Sam. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris, for this great presentation and for this great overview. Merci beaucoup, Chris, pour cette excellente présentation. Now is the time actually to open the floor, and I know that your time is limited, Chris, so feel free to let me know when you have to leave, because you indicated that you have some time pressure. But if it's not too much, and if we could indulge your participation and your presence for a few questions from the audience, if there are any questions.
Thanks. I will stay to the very end, Sam.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Merci, Chris. Thank you so much. So, donc, on va passer aux questions maintenant. Très chers collègues, si vous avez des questions, I see a hand raised by Dr. Breika, I believe from Mauritania, if I'm not mistaken. If we can give the floor to Dr. Mohamed El Hassan.
نعم هو كذلك. شكرا جزيلا دكتور سيمول، شكرا للجميع. بارك الله فيكم. اسال عن الاجهزه الذكيه المحموله او الرادارات المحموله التي يمكن ان تستخدم في الغش الغذائي، لو سمحتم امثله منها بالاسماء لنا اذا كانت تسمع بها، ونحن مهتمين بالامر. شكرا.
So if I understand correctly, Dr. Breika, you want to have some examples of these portable devices, right? Some examples of applications. Is that what I understand?
نعم هو كذلك.
The sound, at least I cannot hear you anymore right now. So maybe, Chris, if you don't mind, maybe giving some examples of these miniaturized or rapid testing in tier one, what you introduced as tier one applications?
So thank you, Sam, and thank you for that really good question. As it happens, I'm sitting with a device. It's in my hand. It's a near infrared scanner. And what it will do is, and in my other hand, I've got a sample, and actually it's cumin, the spice cumin. I can scan that sample. The scanner will take a fingerprint, a molecular fingerprint of the sample, send it to my smartphone. My smartphone will then send that sample to a cloud-based system where we have stored many thousands of fingerprints of food. Within 2 seconds, if you've got a reasonable Wi-Fi signal, back on the app on my phone, I will be told the sample is fine, it is genuine, or if it looks like it has been adulterated in some way.
Chris, if you allow me, because for this part we don't have simultaneous in French, so I will ask you actually to let me interpret very quickly. Donc en français, en fait, le professeur Chris Elliott a montré justement un exemple d'un système où il a justement dans sa main un scanner et de l'autre côté un échantillon de cumin. Il a mis le scanner devant l'échantillon et le signal qui a été reçu va être envoyé en fait à une application sur son portable et au bout de quelques secondes, s'il y a un réseau Wi-Fi suffisant, il va pouvoir avoir la réponse si l'échantillon est considéré comme étant adultéré. Donc, il s'agit d'un échantillon d'épices. Thanks, Chris. Please continue if you wish. Is that Dr. Breaker? I don't know if that's okay, if that answers your question. And if you have any other demonstrations, Chris, by all means. I think actually Dr. Breaker,
إجابة
yes.
وفية 100%. شكرا لعلماء الغذاء، شكرا من القلب. هم بحاجة إليكم. شكرا.
Thanks. So essentially, Chris, you probably heard the answer is that it answers this question 100%, and that these are things that are needed 100%.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions from colleagues or any remark for that matter?
I see a hand up, Sami. Is it from Dr. Mohammed?
Yes, I think it's from Dr. Mohammed. So it's the same hand. So that was the same one. I see Dr. Mamadou. Dr. Mamadou Ba, please.
Thank you very much, Chris. That was really enlightening. And I think we've learned a lot from this presentation, to be honest. In my opening, I was talking about the challenges. For example, how do you think, in your opinion, we can deal with the challenge of outdated technology that is actually existing? I know the infrared is another avenue, but in general, how do you think we can use, what approach do you think we can adopt in order to address this outdated technology and obsolete systems that are actually belittling some of our food control systems in the continent? Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Bat, because again, it's an extremely good and very important question. So in my mind, I think the philosophy is at a country level, the investment in this type of tier one testing technology, it's not so expensive. A lot of samples can be taken, checked, and analyzed. What I believe is the problem is thinking about building many dozens of really high-performing laboratories. I know I built one. It took me 15 years actually to build it to the level that I wanted it at. And I had quite a lot of resource from the UK government. I had a lot of resource from Europe. So I think this comes back to the point of collaboration. Why not think about a number of centers of excellence in analytical chemistry, in food fraud detection for the continent of Africa. It might be 5 regional laboratories. And it's a concept I'm currently working on in the Caribbean at the moment. The Caribbean region wants to do the same. It wants to fight food fraud. It wants to export more food to America. It wants to export more food to Europe. They cannot build world-class laboratories in each of the Caribbean countries. So I'm working on a project where it will be building a single center of excellence that will be able to do the very high-end analysis. And it actually, if you do that, it becomes economically much more sustainable.
If you allow me, Chris, very briefly to interpret in French, à la question donc en fait qui a été posée par le docteur Ba sur qu'est-ce qu'il faudrait faire en fait justement pour pouvoir accéder à ce type de technologie qui permettent justement de répondre à ces défis. Et donc le professeur Elliott a mentionné que pour le premier cran, donc le premier tier, en fait, c'est une technologie qui est quand même assez abordable et assez accessible, donc pour la plupart. Mais là où en fait les défis demeurent, c'est pour construire justement ces gros laboratoires performants. Et il a indiqué que pour lui, ça lui a pris plus d'une quinzaine d'années pour construire ce genre de laboratoire multidisciplinaire. Par contre, ce qu'il a prôné, c'est le développement de centres régionaux d'excellence qui permettent justement de focaliser les efforts et de pouvoir les partager au sein de régions ou de sous-régions. Il a mentionné un projet similaire qui est en train de se faire et qu'il est en train de piloter dans la région des Caraïbes. I'm seeing some questions on the chat that I would like to, I'm going to go through them briefly, Chris, and then I'm going to ask you to address them if you don't mind. So I'm going to go through them, as I see them. One of the questions is related to maybe giving some examples of cases of food fraud that you might see, and particularly in Africa. The question about harmonizing, or how can we harmonize the approaches to tackle food fraud in Africa, and what is the current cost to public health in Africa? I guess this is the ongoing question. Another colleague, Jackie Gibney, indicating that this is interesting information, working in Central Asia and Africa, and I see similarities of the challenges. Have you idea what are the costs of the technology? So basically the cost of the technology that you presented, Professor Elliott. Other questions about the recording of this. The recording of this, by the way, will be available and will be accessible from both the AFRAF website as well as from the GeForce website. You can find it already. We are streaming live right now on the YouTube channel of the Global Food Regulatory Science Society. There is a question in French about detection of food fraud through these scans and through these applications. Where can we find information about these, Chris? And another mention is that Africa seems to be playing catch up most of the time. What is the best strategy for regulators to engage with small scale producers to ensure food integrity without hurting their livelihood? And I will finish with this question. I know I'm giving you many questions there, Chris. In a resource limited setting, is it possible to use highly accurate rapid test kits in Africa, for example? So I'm gonna basically stop there. So some people are asking about the name of the portable device that you and that's actually Dr. Braika is asking for the name of the device. So I will do the interpretation in French with your answers, if you don't mind, Chris, just
Okay.
for speed.
So I think, first of all, I want to thank the participants for so many questions. So clearly my accent isn't so bad. So thank you for that. And the questions are all fantastic, I have to tell you. Now, what are the big issues of food fraud in Africa? Again, I'm trying to find that out. I work with some amazing collaborators. I'm working with a group in Ghana, the Ivory Coast with Kenya, Nigeria, and we're trying to assess some of this at the moment. I think some of the common themes that we come across, for instance, is palm oil. A lot of adulteration of palm oil, the red oil, and with those horrible Sudan dyes, for instance, which is extremely toxic. I think Africa, you like to cook with a lot of different herbs and spices, very similar to Asia, and there is massive fraud in virtually all of those ingredients, those food ingredients. Another I would put on my list is rice. And I put rice on my list because Africa imports a lot of rice. And I am extremely worried that some of the rice that is actually going into Africa is not safe. And there is a lot of false certification around things like mold or around aflatoxins as well. And very recently, I was given some very good examples of fraud in tomato paste. Again, highly adulterated with dyes, bulked out with starches and so forth. So I think, you know, it is the commodities that people rely on, exist upon, and I would say if you look at the continent of Africa, we would uncover a lot more fraud. Now, in terms,
if you allow me briefly, donc en fait, rapidement, le professeur Elliott mentionnait certains incidents majeurs de fraude alimentaire qui ont été recensés en Afrique à travers le travail qu'il effectue avec plusieurs collaborateurs, notamment au Kenya et au Nigeria, de la fraude qui concerne l'huile de palme, qui est une des huiles parmi les plus utilisées en Afrique. Malheureusement, la fraude donc implique ces colorants industriels que l'on appelle les colorants Soudan, qui ont une toxicité certaine. Il y a une fraude qui aussi concerne les herbes et les épices, sachant que la cuisine africaine fait appel à beaucoup de ces commodités-là dans les processus donc, de cuisine. Donc une fraude massive d'herbes et d'épices. Également, en fait, un ingrédient majeur qui est le riz, consommé en abondance en Afrique, qui fait l'objet de certifications frauduleuses, notamment avec des problèmes remarqués de sécurité sanitaire, notamment de moisissures, de présence de mycotoxines. Et enfin, un autre exemple qui touche des tomates en conserve, notamment des pâtes de tomates donc, en conserve. Please, Chris.
Thank you. I think the next question that I think is really important, and it's a very good point, is that I think the question was, Africa always seems to be trying to play catch up. I think Africa has a chance to leapfrog, to jump what is happening in a lot of other parts of the world. I say that because I think Africa is embracing digitization. I see so many stories where smallholder farmers, they will be using apps for many, many different things. And this isn't the case in a lot of other parts of the world. So I think there is a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot of knowledge about using digital systems. And I would say, rather than Africa just saying, let's try to catch up, let's do what they're doing in Europe, let's build these same laboratories in Europe, I think it's the time to leapfrog Europe. I think it is the time to think about that fourth industrial revolution, fifth industrial revolution, and just to say that I know that one of the big success stories of China looked at the Western world, decided they were not going to play catch up, they were going to leapfrog. And the leapfrogging, a lot of it isn't technology.
Donc, en fait, pour résumer très rapidement l'intervention du professeur Elliott, en fait, là maintenant, passons par les opportunités, pour discuter des opportunités. Le professeur Elliott mentionne que l'Afrique est pleine d'opportunités. Et une des opportunités, c'est la façon dont les producteurs africains, et notamment même les plus petits producteurs, les plus petits producteurs même au sein de la ferme, comment est-ce qu'ils ont accueilli les changements numériques, notamment avec l'accueil de la numérisation, de la digitalisation, comment tout le monde utilise des applications et ces objets intelligents. Et l'idée, en fait, c'est au lieu que l'Afrique joue un système de rattrapage et essaye de copier, par exemple, les autres juridictions comme l'Europe, c'est de faire ce que l'on appelle le saut de grenouille, le leapfrog. Donc, en fait, d'aller au-delà de ce que les autres ont fait. Et justement, grâce à cette quatrième ou cinquième révolution industrielle, grâce à ces transformations numériques, l'Afrique a une opportunité d'avoir même du leadership là-dessus. L'exemple, je dirais, à suivre, comme l'a mentionné le professeur Elliott, c'est de voir comment la Chine a observé comment est-ce que l'Ouest s'est développé, mais au lieu de copier simplement ce que faisait l'Ouest, ils ont décidé donc de faire ce saut de grenouille et d'investir massivement dans la technologie. Et maintenant, en fait, ils sont en avance par rapport à l'Ouest d'une façon générale. Chris,
Thank you,
back to
Sam.
you.
And I think what I'll try to do, because I know we are running out of time, I'll try to capture a number of the different questions about the technology, the handheld technology that I mentioned. So this is one of the scanners that we use, but actually we've got a number of different scanning technologies. This is wonderful for solid samples. We have another scanner which is beautiful for liquid samples. And actually we've got a third scanner which Sammy will know I'm getting really excited about, is actually you don't even have to take the food sample out of the container, out of the packaging. You can scan through the packaging. So we have different scanning technologies which have different applications. And in terms of what we think is the beauty of our system is you're not buying really a scanner, you're buying a complete testing system. All of the models of lots of different food ingredients, we have already produced these fingerprints. So you buy access to all of those fingerprints actually through the cloud-based portal. And then in a lot of cases, we will deal with companies or even countries to say, yes, this is fine, but actually it doesn't include this food type or this ingredient. And then what we do is through partnerships, we work with those companies or countries to build the models itself. And actually one of our great examples, we're building a model for cacao at the moment, actually using this scanner. And that model will say if it has been adulterated, it will even tell us the country of origin of the cacao. And we have got, we call it a coalition of companies that have come together because they all want exactly the same thing. So the company that I founded, actually, Sam, it's our 5th anniversary this year, the same as GFOS, actually. So it's about the same length of time. What I suggest I do, we have got some information, just 1 or 2 A4 pages on a PDF. If I supplied those to GFOS, maybe you could distribute them, and then I will put points of contact in. And yes, we are a commercial company, but we are a company with a mission of trying to eliminate food fraud. So we're really keen to work with people with difficult problems. And we spend a lot of time trying to understand those problems and trying to develop the right solution. So I would be very, very keen to enter into more partnerships, collaborations right across Africa.
Thank you, Chris. I'm just going to actually add, because I'm seeing some questions here that are popping up as you were speaking, Chris. And there was a question as to whether this device can also address honey, whether it is natural, like honey adulteration, amongst other things. So that was also one of the questions that I saw. And one of the challenges that was mentioned by one of the colleagues is, if we are saying that Africa is facing a major gap in terms of infrastructure, how can we think of achieving Laboratory 2030? Actually, that same question was kind of repeated in a different way by other colleagues. So,
okay, so first of all, honey. Honey is one of the food commodities in the world. It is most prone to fraud. It is big business. And the difficulty with honey fraud is there are so many different varieties of honey. The other difficulty is those people who cheat in honey are very smart, very clever people. So as soon as you develop a test for honey, the people who cheat will find a way to evade that particular testing method. Often people say to me, what is the best test for honey fraud? And the answer is there is no such thing. There are a number of very good tests, but each of them have their own vulnerabilities and frailties. But how we are trying to combat that at the moment is actually it's back to artificial intelligence again. And we are running several projects. We call it data fusion. So we can actually take the results from several different testing methods. We can combine that data, we can fuse it together. Then we can do some nice machine learning on it. And my goodness, then it becomes much more difficult to cheat. So that data fusion, we think, is the best way to combat food fraud going forward in honey. And I think this Lab 2030, this is back to partnerships, collaborations. I talked about Agilent technology. Agilent want to build Laboratory 2030, not in Asia, not in Europe, not in the United States. They want to build it in Africa, and they it's finding the right partners there. There is a huge desire to do this, and I think it comes back to that same point: is there is no way Africa will have 55 centers of excellence in food fraud detection. It's about which are the regions working on a regional basis, those countries working together, because you have similar problems, but also similar ambitions and similar opportunities to grow your food system.
Thank you, Chris. I will try actually briefly in French, actually, both your previous comments and those ones. Donc, rapidement, l'interprétation française concernant les réponses du professeur Elliott, notamment sur les techniques de scanner, les techniques rapides, si justement il y a une seule technique ou d'autres. Donc, en fait, ce que le professeur Elliott a mentionné, c'est qu'il y a un scanner pour des produits solides, d'autres qui sont plus adaptés pour des produits liquides, d'autres qu'en fait qui fonctionnent comme un système en fait finalement intégré, c'est-à-dire que ce que vous avez n'est pas un système simplement qui analyse un échantillon, mais c'est un système qui vous donne aussi une réponse quant à l'authenticité du produit en comparant finalement ce qui est observé avec l'empreinte digitale d'un produit alimentaire. Il y a eu même des projets qui visent justement d'utiliser ces techniques rapides pour pouvoir identifier des fraudes concernant les pays d'origine de produits alimentaires. Il y a eu une réponse précise par rapport au miel et l'analyse du miel. La réponse du professeur Elliott, c'est qu'il n'y a pas un test magique pour le miel. Le miel est une des commodités alimentaires parmi les plus fraudées au monde. Et en fait, les fraudeurs ne manquent pas d'ingéniosité par rapport aux approches d'adultération et de fraude qu'ils utilisent. Donc, à chaque fois qu'il y a une méthode ou un test, il y a, si vous voulez, une contrepartie et des gens qui essayent justement de contourner ces essais. En général, on essaye d'avoir plusieurs approches de tests disponibles. Alors, le professeur Elliott a mentionné cependant une technique qui est en cours de développement qui utilise notamment l'intelligence artificielle et qui se base sur ce que l'on appelle la fusion de données. Donc, en utilisant le recours à plusieurs tests à la fois et à leurs réponses, et en essayant de fusionner les données et avec l'apport de l'intelligence artificielle, on peut arriver à des réponses qui permettent de mieux répondre à la fraude du miel. Enfin, à la question liée sur la possibilité justement de construire ce laboratoire 2030, donc le professeur Elliott a mentionné justement que la compagnie Agilent, entre autres, est en train d'investir dans ce sens et justement d'essayer de développer ces centres d'excellence, pas en Asie, mais justement le choix a été fait sur l'Afrique pour justement développer ce concept de laboratoire 2030. I see a question or a hand raised by Mr. or Dr. Mustafa Diab. If we can give Mustafa the floor.
Hello, Dr. Professor Sam. Hello, Professor Chris. Hi.
Hello, Dr. Mustafa.
I have
please.
a question for Professor Elliott. While these portable scanners provide rapid screening, but what is your view for their legal standing in regulatory disputes? As can this handheld device be used as a primary evidence for something big like recalling our product, or shall it only be for lab confirmation from ISO 17225 accredited lab or something like that? So it can be only for internal use, or it can be as wider scope.
So thank you. And again, it's another really excellent question. So I really like this handheld technology. I've spent a lot of time developing it, validating it. But from a regulatory perspective, the tests tend to be about 95 to 98% reliable, which is really good number, but not in a regulatory context. And actually for our testing, we have ISO 17025 accredited methods for the scanning technology. But I think I come back to my point about tier 1, tier 2. Tier 1, screen your samples. 95% of those samples will be okay, they will be fine. It's the 5% that the device identifies goes to the tier 2 test, the mass spectrometry, which will be ISO 17025 accredited, and then can be used in legal proceedings.
Donc, si je me permets de traduire très rapidement la question et la réponse qui a été faite ici, la question qui a été proposée par Monsieur Mustafa Diab, c'était: est-ce que ces méthodes pourraient être utilisées dans un aspect réglementaire, notamment dans le cadre de disputes réglementaires? Et la réponse proposée par le professeur Elliott est que malgré un degré de certitude ou d'exactitude plutôt qui avoisine les 95 à 98%, qui est en fait un très bon chiffre, mais ces tests pourraient ne pas être considérés comme étant ce qu'il faut pour des systèmes réglementaires. Et il y a donc d'autres alternatives qui sont recherchées à ce niveau et qui pourraient être implantées dans des laboratoires ISO 17025. There was a question in Arabic here that I'm going to read, Chris, from a colleague about the adaptability of this test for uncovering fraud of dairy products, particularly the addition of non-animal derived fats, so essentially plant-based products in dairy products. Donc, la question proposée par un de nos collègues, c'est sur l'adaptabilité de ces tests justement pour pouvoir traquer la fraude liée aux produits laitiers et l'addition de produits végétaux ou d'huile végétale, notamment dans les produits laitiers.
And thank you again. So dairy, again, it's a hugely important food sector. And actually, you know, a lot of dairy products is incredibly important to the nutrition of babies and young children. We did a study in actually in India a number of years ago, and we found 50 different ways people were adulterating milk in India. And Some of it was horrendous toxic compounds going into the milk. Now, the approach that we would say is you don't need to develop 50 different tests to detect the adulteration of milk. What we do is we produce the fingerprints of what good unadulterated milk should look like. And that will change per season. It will change per country. It will change per species. It'll change from buffalo milk to cow milk to goat's milk. But you can build up those reference libraries of what good looks like. And then you can compare the scan. And again, this is beautiful for scanning milk samples. We can tell if that fingerprint matches what the good samples look like. Now, what we always do is when a sample does not meet those specifications of that fingerprint, we will then conduct the tier 2 testing to find out what is the adulterant that these bad people have used this time. And of course, we will let our AI system know that the next time you see a scan like this, we can actually not only say that the milk has been adulterated, we can identify the particular adulterant. And that's where machine learning is such a powerful technique.
Thank you, Chris. Donc, la réponse proposée par le professeur Elliott, c'est que le lait et les produits laitiers sont parmi les denrées aussi les plus visées par la fraude alimentaire et qui ont un impact considérable. Il a mentionné qu'en Inde, plus de 50% des produits laitiers qui sont commercialisés tendent à être fraudés. Alors, au lieu d'avoir, si vous voulez, 50 différents tests qui vont viser de chercher l'authenticité du lait, il y a la possibilité de développer ce que l'on appelle une certaine empreinte d'un produit laitier. Alors, bien entendu, cette empreinte va changer avec les régions, avec les saisons et avec les systèmes de production, mais il est possible justement d'avoir toutes ces données et de combiner, bien entendu, ces données avec des systèmes numériques, notamment l'apprentissage en machine, donc l'intelligence artificielle, pour pouvoir par la suite avoir une base qui permet de reconnaître ce qui est fraudé de ce qui ne l'est pas. I'm trying, I hope I'm doing justice to your answers, Chris, there, but...
Sammy, amazing job. You're translating into so many different languages. I feel very inadequate.
No, not at all, believe me. So I saw a hand up from one of our AFRAF colleagues, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Yusuf Gongo, please. If we can give the floor to Dr. Yusuf.
Yes, good evening, Professor Samuel and Professor Elliott. In fact, I have three questions, short questions. My first question is, can this technology be extended to pathogens? Second question is, how many different type of adulteration can one apparatus detect? And my third question, what is the approximate price for one apparatus?
Okay, thank you. So, three very good questions. The one about pathogens is very interesting. And actually, we have now partnered with an amazing research group and spin-out company from MIT in the United States, where it won't be this type of scanner, but it's another type of scanner where we are looking for detection of foodborne pathogens. And the big advance isn't in this technology, it's in their ability, their AI abilities. So I think not now, but in the next couple of years, you will start to see pathogen detection using AI. I'm quite sure of that. In terms, and maybe do you want to answer that, Sam?
Sure. Donc en fait, pour l'instant, ce type de technologie ne répond pas justement à la détection des pathogènes, mais dans le futur, il y a actuellement des recherches en cours qui pourraient combiner justement des techniques physiques, mais également l'intelligence artificielle pour pouvoir identifier des pathogènes de façon rapide avec ce type de procédé.
Thank you. The second question was, how many different types of adulterants can we measure? And I think the wonderful answer is basically any adulterants that are used will cause that food type to have a different fingerprint, and we will identify that different fingerprint. And we have a lot of examples. For instance, some of our early work was in the herb oregano, or you might call it oregano. We very quickly identified that there was a particular leaf. It was actually olive leaves were being used as the adulterant. The people who were cheating thought, aha, okay, they can detect olive leaves. So they took olive leaves out and started to use cistus leaves, but the fingerprint, and they kept trying to change the leaf. We always kept detecting it.
Donc la deuxième question concernant combien d'adultérants cette technologie est capable de détecter, et la réponse est autant qu'il y en aurait. Notamment, par exemple, pourquoi? Parce qu'en fait, ce système est basé sur l'empreinte du produit, donc l'empreinte d'authenticité du produit. Donc, toute déviation à l'authenticité va être détectée. L'exemple qui a été donné, c'est ce qui a été observé, par exemple, dans l'adultération de l'origan, donc oregano, qui est une herbe donc, et une épice alimentaire. L'adultération se faisait avant avec l'addition des feuilles d'olive. Quand les fraudeurs ont voulu changer de type de feuilles parce qu'ils ont vu qu'ils étaient, on a pu les identifier, eh bien, en changeant les feuilles, ça n'a rien changé. On a pu toujours détecter cette adultération et cette fraude.
Thank you. And the third and final question was about the cost, the approximate cost. So I would start off saying is that the high-end equipment, like LC MSMS, that's going to cost $400,000, $500,000. That's approximately. Then if you go down to say an HPLC system, it's probably going to cost you $80,000, $100,000 US. When we come down to our scanners, it's $10,000 to $15,000 US. So it's a fraction of the cost of existing techniques.
Bien, donc la réponse à la question combien cette technologie coûte. Et donc, le professeur Elliott a mentionné les différents types de technologies qui sont utilisées pour le diagnostic alimentaire et de la fraude. Entre 400 et 500 000 $ normalement pour des systèmes sophistiqués de spectrométrie de masse qui est couplé à des techniques de séparation, donc comme des LC-MS. Entre 80 et 100 000 $ lorsqu'on parle de techniques de séparation de type HPLC classique. Et là, vous descendez à entre 10 et 15 000 $ US lorsqu'on parle de ces systèmes de diagnostic rapide. Donc, à chaque fois, vous descendez d'un ordre de grandeur, et donc c'est une fraction des prix qui sont pratiqués pour les systèmes de diagnostic complexes. I think actually, Chris, we have indulged your participation, your presence, and your expertise long enough. But considering actually the level of interest and how many of our colleagues are still with us after 1 hour and a half of the start of the event, I believe we peaked at 160 participants. We are at about 107 participants. So very thankful to you, Chris, for your contribution and your willingness to share your knowledge, your experience, and your expertise with the African food regulatory community and beyond the African food regulatory community. I can tell you, and I hope that you will indulge us, that this is not going to be the last time we will see you in an AFRAF/GForce webinar. And we thank you in advance for your contribution and your willingness to share. My thanks also go to all those colleagues who participated in the preparation and in the implementation of this webinar series. My thanks also go to all the AFRAF leaders who have supported the development of this series of webinars. And I would like to say that we wish you all the best for those of you observing the month of Ramadan for this last period, but we also wish all the peace and calm for all the troubled regions in the world, and in particular for the region of the Middle East. Once again, thank you very much, and we wish you a great end of a day. Merci à toutes et à tous. Merci Chris pour votre participation. Un grand merci à tous ceux qui ont permis la réalisation de cet événement, mais également à tous les leaders de l'AFRAF qui se sont joints à nous et qui ont suggéré justement ce type d'événement. Un autre souhait, un souhait de paix pour toutes les régions troublées du monde et en particulier pour la région du Moyen-Orient. Thank you very much and have a great end of day.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Chris.
5 years ago, a vision was born. To bring science closer to policy and to build stronger, safer food systems across the world. That vision became reality. The Global Food Regulatory Science Society, G-Force, in partnership with national, regional, and international organizations across the globe, G-Force has become a global hub for regulatory science, connecting experts, institutions, and governments. Together, we have become a driving force for scientific convergence and regulatory harmonization. Through training, mentoring, and scientific exchange, G-Force continues to build capacity in food risk assessment, data systems, and regulatory frameworks. As G-Force celebrates its 5th anniversary, we look toward the future. A future where regulatory science empowers every nation to protect consumers, enhance trust, facilitate trade, and strengthen global food systems. G-Force, connecting science, people, and policy for a safer world.